In 1986, people were greeted by The Legend of Zelda's iconic title screen, marking the start of their harsh journey through Hyrule. This is among the most inclusive Zelda games released. The main character, named Link in subsequent titles, has no name. Instead, you name him. This puts a great emphasis on the idea that this is your adventure, complementing the often explorative and non-linear nature of the game. So, let's take our trusty Presembot, Hello, and give him some real-world experiences. You are instantly thrown into the game with a decision to make. Which way do you go? You can go left, up, or right. There's even a cave to go in, which is perhaps the most exciting option. Let's go in there. Oh, a sword! Well, now what? There hasn't been anything to use the sword for. What should be done now? Zelda 1 is a game that wants to allow you to go almost anywhere. And you could do that, but you'll be faced with some pretty severe consequences if you take the wrong path at the wrong time. There are a lot of items that you'll need to have to be prepared for everything, but the first trouble is, nobody really knew that when the game came out. There was a manual with hints about certain things, but it didn't say where to go, so people would get lost very quickly. A guide was used for my playthrough to get all items so I could complete my journey without having to spend many more hours on several things that would eventually be discovered to be a lost cause, due to needing one specific item that I couldn't possibly have known I needed. A lost cause, just like how long that sentence was. I mean, what the heck? The first item to pick up after the sword is bombs. And then you can go all around the world to pick up some extra heart containers to increase maximum health, and even get an upgraded sword at this early stage in the game. But we need rupees to buy things. I don't have the rupees I need. You can get a few here or there by killing enemies, but most of them are found by dropping bombs against random walls, or perhaps burning down a specific bush with the candle, another item you can buy. Who would think to do that specifically? Perhaps to the developers it was all part of going on the journey yourself, but it's a little too hidden. Nonetheless, it's quite fun traveling the world finding friendly moblins that will give you a secret rupee stash. Sometimes you can walk in on an angry moblin who wants to be paid for the door you just broke, although having a guide is handy for avoiding these entirely. Initially, if the players couldn't figure out what to do, they probably had to wait for the next issue of Nintendo Power. You could also find other old men who want you to gamble. Of course, when playing with save states, it's no real matter having to play the money-making game, but imagine the frustration of not knowing the places to find rupees and being stuck with this random old man, trying to make money to buy that blue ring for a whopping 250 rupees. I'll also add that, while perhaps less random, some of the major item and even dungeon locations are hidden in strange places that you might not expect. The main objective of the game is to complete 8 main dungeons, each of which will have a piece of the Triforce that we have been told Princess Zelda has hidden. The dungeons will feature some enemies that appear often more threatening than those in the overworld, within some maze-like layouts with special shapes. In each dungeon you can acquire an optional compass to show you the location of the end, where you would fight a boss, as well as a map to show you the layout. However, the maps become less useful in later dungeons, since some have rooms that go off the map, and some solutions to getting through dungeons require taking underground passages to rooms far away. It would have been nice to have a map item outside of the dungeon, which I feel could easily have been implemented on the pause menu, as opposed to showing the completion of the Triforce for most of the screen. A compass could show you the location of all the remaining dungeons, for example. Alas, it was not to be, and we were left with getting lost all the time. Each dungeon would also have a boss battle. There was no unique music at this stage, but they did make a snarl sound, if you want to call it that, to signify that it was a boss. Some bosses ended up being reused in later dungeons, but harder. For example, Gleeok in level 4 has only 2 heads, but later appears with 3 heads, and again in level 8 with 4 heads. A more bizarre example would be Aquamentus, the final boss of level 1, returning exactly the same as the final boss of level 7, but much easier to defeat due to the likelihood of collecting more heart containers to increase maximum health, and weapon upgrades. And hey, it's exactly the same boss from level 1. And it's dead. Usually when bosses were moved to later dungeons with no changes, they were only mini-bosses, but apparently when level 7 was designed, the developers didn't want to buff him up. All in all, the game controls pretty nicely. It's simple, just 2 action buttons and moving around. And if you use a standard control pad, it's nice. Easy to learn but difficult to master, which is usually the best kind of design. The hope is that you'll have mastered it by the end of the game to beat the much more difficult challenges. Although, being real, the difficulty did ramp up a bit too quickly in some areas, and I never really was able to master the controls enough to consistently get through them. Wizrobes and Darknuts and Patras, oh my! Unfortunately, there would be very few NES games that I could review without talking about the console's hardware limitations. This game takes a large hit in the sound department. When you're outside of dungeons, the music is always the same thing. Don't get me wrong, it's a legendary tune, and it's been reused in many Zelda games since then because it's so memorable and, well, epic. But after spending a long time in the overworld, probably getting lost, it gets old hearing the same thing over and over. Not as old as the dungeon music though, which has an even shorter loop, and it just goes on and on as you try to figure out where to go. I suspect the developers didn't actually want to make it this way, but it's always unfortunate for the final product to be hindered by the console limitations. There are other complaints I have in the audio department too, such as that infernal beeping when you're at low health. The health refill is also obnoxiously high-pitched and can go on for a very long time. With all that said, I want to quickly talk about some clever compositional techniques used by Koji Kondo in the soundtrack. Yes, the loops are short, but that's not his fault necessarily. Firstly, that overworld theme. It's too hard to determine whether it's in a major key or a minor key, and this is a crucial element to how the tone of the game is set. Major keys are often associated as happy, and minor keys as sad, in simple terms. You could make it the other way around, but for now that's irrelevant. The composition here makes it basically neither, so the song isn't happy or sad. It's just an adventure we're on and we have to keep pushing through no matter what happens. You come out of a spooky dungeon and hey, this theme is playing again. Forget that dungeon, let's get back into the swing of things. I'll also mention the theme for the final dungeon in the game, which is different to the other 8 main dungeons. The melody is always harmonized in half octaves, striking chords known as the Devil's Interval, but technically called a tritone. This is a very intense and rather scary chord, and you know the final dungeon means serious business. And hey, that's accurate because the final dungeon was quite an ordeal. Focusing in on this final dungeon a little more though, it feels like there's no way you could possibly find the end on your own. Maybe if you have the magic key and you can open every door, you can test out every way you find. But when you factor in that some walls can be bombed open and you can't tell which, it just becomes far too much of a mess. At the end of the dungeon, we'll find the final boss, Ganon. He's actually rather unique, as he becomes invisible, and you'll have to track the movements of his fireballs to find out where you need to strike with a sword. After a few hits of that, he'll reappear stuck, and you need to hit him with a silver arrow. But wait, did you know to find the silver arrows? They were hidden somewhere in the dungeon, and it adds another layer of messiness to trek through. No silver arrows, no finishing the game. If you did find them, you're in for a satisfying finish to the game. Now go rescue Zelda. So, let's take a look back. Perhaps I was sounding harsh at times by picking out a lot of negatives, but the truth is I really like this game. It's fun to play, even having to use a guide. Sure, it gets difficult, but if you take the time to master it all, I'd imagine it's not even too hard to do without save states. That said, the fact here is that I did use save states so that I wouldn't have to spend too much time streaming it, and force my poor editor to go through way more footage than necessary. Therefore, my final score for The Legend of Zelda will be 7.8 out of 10. Too much water! Okay. Memes aside, there's basically just a lack of structure for guidance, if that makes any sense at all. I do totally understand that they wanted to make it more of an open game, but whether you've got the skills to do things out of order or not, it's rather limited and too difficult to figure things out. So, as I mentioned just a minute ago, it is actually quite fun to play blind with a guide. ZeldaDungeon.net is a very useful website for basically all Zelda games. Hopefully I won't need to refer to this too often for future Zelda games. If you're looking to play this today, there are several ways you can, and I would definitely recommend it. This game doesn't have any official remakes as far as I'm aware, but it was re-released several times, first for the GameCube in 2003, where the spelling and grammar was cleaned up massively. If you've got an NES floating around, by all means play that version too, but you might be laughing a bit more at the text on the screen. You can also play it on Wii U Virtual Console with the option of restore points, like me, I'm bad, or on the Switch with a Nintendo Online license where you can rewind if things go wrong. Tell me, did you agree with the points I've made? What rating would you give The Legend of Zelda for the NES, released in 1986? As ever, thank you for watching, and please, continue to be your own unique self. Please enjoy one final clip from my stream when I rescued Zelda. Oh, that's it. He's dead. And he just crumbles into an ultimate Triforce and a pile of flesh. Oh no. Huh. I don't think that was supposed to happen. Yeah. So can I end the game like this? I can! I can end the game without taking out the fire.